Entonces vamos a empezar por aplicar lo que ahora sabemos del pretérito. Y aquí tengo una pregunta para ustedes. ¿Qué hiciste tú ayer? ¿No? Ayer era lunes. Entonces necesitan responder con 3 actividades específicas aplicando el pretérito. Y por eso tengo un ejemplo de un verbo regular, trabajar en la forma de yo. Ayer por la mañana yo trabajé. Por la tarde, este verbo irregular, ir, fui a mi casa por la tarde. Y por la noche, el verbo completamente irregular con esta construcción de hacer algo obligatorio, tuve que corregir unos exámenes. Y hablando de los exámenes, 6 exámenes están listos, pero se los voy a devolver en clase jueves porque necesitamos toda la hora hoy para hablar del imperfecto y pretérito. Ok, entonces, ahora les toca a ustedes. Háganme un favor y escriban 3 actividades específicas que hicieron ustedes ayer. Ahora en sus papeles. Les doy como 5 minutos. Actividades específicas. Ahora vamos a hacer la misma actividad con el imperfecto, los verbos que vimos en la lección 10, había, o los verbos irregulares, ir, iba, ser, era, ¿no? 3 actividades que hacían ustedes de niños, ¿no? En general, nada específico. Por ejemplo, de niña yo iba a la casa de mis abuelos, comía muchos dulces, jugaba al fútbol, ¿no? Tenemos ir, iba, comer, comía, jugar, jugaba. Ahora escriban 3 actividades en el imperfecto que hacían ustedes de niños y después comparten estas actividades con su grupo y por último identifican una actividad que todos tienen en común y necesitan poner este verbo en la forma de nosotros, ¿ok? La misma actividad, pero ahora con el imperfecto. ¿Entienden? ¿Sí? Con todas las actividades, jugábamos o íbamos o nadábamos, etc. Estas son actividades repetidas, habituales. Entonces, como les dije cuando hablamos del pretérito y como les dije cuando hablamos del imperfecto, hay una diferencia profunda entre el uso del pretérito y el uso del imperfecto, porque usamos exclusivamente el pretérito para acciones específicas. Recuerden en la lección 10, también nosotros respondimos a la pregunta, ¿cuándo fue la última vez que te enfermaste? Me enfermé la semana pasada o en agosto. Esa es una acción específica, ¿no? Y también en la lección 10 hablamos de niña o de niño, con qué frecuencia te enfermabas y me enfermaba mucho. Entonces podemos usar el mismo verbo enfermarse para hablar de una acción específica o una acción repetida, ¿no? Y esta es la diferencia más distinta entre el pretérito y el imperfecto. Entonces quiero clarificar en inglés las diferencias para ver si ustedes entienden bien las diferencias. So basically, when would we use the preterite and when would we use the imperfect? What really is the difference between these two tenses? I just want to make sure we understand before we really start using them simultaneously and examine them further. Shelby?
The preterite has a specific timeline of a beginning to an end, and the imperfect doesn't really. It's more like general.
Yeah, it's usually vague, open. So the preterite has a specific timeline, a specific beginning and end. And on Oaks, there's a document with a visual kind of map of all the tenses. And the preterite, we can pinpoint exactly when that action occurred, whether we have a reference of time like en septiembre or el año pasado or ayer, or if it's an action that most often has a clear beginning or end, like, the verb empezar or the verb terminar, to start, to end, or things like that. Some verbs are more obvious that they wouldn't be ongoing or repeated unless we had more context. And I like to compare the preterite tense kind of with the simple past tense in English. I closed the door, or I worked all day yesterday. Those verbs in English that have ed on them typically, not always, but typically translate in the preterite tense in Spanish. The imperfect tense, though, are much more general. There's no real clear beginning or end, and they're ongoing actions or repeated or habitual actions, which we just saw in the activity you just did when you talked about what you used to do as children. But also in chapter 10, we use the imperfect tense to talk about symptoms. Remember in the ampliación activity, we talked about describing our symptoms. And we said tenía dolor de cabeza, or tenía fiebre, or me dolía la garganta. Even though we weren't referencing our childhood in those examples, you all applied the imperfect to talk about those aches and pains. Why? Why would you use the imperfect? You had just used the preterite to talk about the last time you got sick. And then I wanted you to use the imperfect to describe your tenses. Remember that? Why did we use the imperfect to describe our symptoms? Does anybody recall? Nico?
We only had the symptoms, because we were sick for that long.
Right, exactly. And it's not really clear the beginning or the end of those symptoms. Now, of course, you could have a fever and then take Advil, and an hour after you took Advil or Tylenol, your fever stopped, okay? So originally we're talking about having a fever. That would be the imperfect. But when we use the verb to stop, your fever ended, that would then be the preterite. When we identify that clear end, then when we'd switch to the preterite. So these tenses can be used simultaneously, and they are used simultaneously to tell stories in the past. And that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to look at a story that relates to chapter voc, talking about getting your driver's license, telling a story in the past. And the only reason why I choose using driver's license, this experience, well, a couple of reasons. One, it applies a lot of chapter vocab, so I really wanted to use lots of chapter vocab. And two, I wanted to provide an example of something that most of us can relate to. So I'm not talking about a story when I went and taught English in Costa Rica, because you all can't really identify with that experience yet. But most of us, especially in U.S. culture, this is like a major milestone when we're growing up. All our lives we're being driven around by somebody. And most of us have a vivid memory, whether it's positive or negative, of getting our driver's license. So I want to tap into what you know so that you can find meaning with this concept, and furthermore, identify the uses of the preterite and imperfect while really maintaining the focus on meaning. And this is important to know. When we're decoding, when we're interpreting information that we receive in Spanish, it's fundamental that we focus on the meaning in order to further understand and ultimately apply the grammar. And oftentimes students struggle with the preterite and imperfect when they struggle with vocab, when they struggle finding the meaning of the verb. So this is foreshadowing some information or advice about the Chapter 11 test. Because what you're going to have to do on the Chapter 11 test is choose between the preterite and imperfect. Now I'm going to give you a paragraph, and normally I don't like it when students have to fill in the blanks, but really with this concept to assess it specifically, do you really understand it? Can you really apply it? I am going to have you fill in the blanks based on a story that's going to use chapter vocab. It's not going to be about getting your driver's license, but it is going to be a different story using vocab about either the car or technology. So it's really, really important that you know your vocab this chapter, not just for the vocab section, but also for the grammar section so that you can apply the preterite and imperfect. Okay, so before we go through and do what you just did, and I go through each verb and identify the meaning and the usage of the tenses, in general, what is the story about? We know it's about getting my driver's license, but...
It's a process of you getting...
Right, I don't talk about just the test. I start off with what? How I felt, exactly, some background information, okay? So my introduction is full of background information. And then in the middle, in the body of my story, I'm focusing on what? The actual test, right? The specific events that occurred. And then my conclusion reveals what? The conclusion basically, I got my license, right, exactly, and then I have just this like summary statement, okay? So every good story has an intro and a body and a conclusion, okay? And I want you to take note of this because this is kind of like what you're going to do for your ampliación. You're going to write a story and you're going to have an introduction with background information and you're going to have a body full of details. And you're going to have a conclusion that summarizes the main idea for your ampliación and probably also on your final exam, the essay for your final exam. So before we even dissect sentence by sentence what's going on here, when you look at that introduction and you look on your paper, do you see lots of P's or lots of I's in the introduction? What tense do we see a lot of?
Imperfect.
The imperfect tense. Okay, so note to self, the imperfect tense provides background information. Background information, why? Because we use the imperfect tense to describe. Describe what was going on. It was a dark and stormy night. That would be in the imperfect, okay? Once upon a time, there lived a beautiful princess. That would be in the imperfect time because we're describing, we're giving background information, and we typically do that in our introduction. And then in our body, when we get to those details, we see a lot of what tense? The preterite, right? Exactly. Just like in your little paragraph that you wrote about the last time you got sick, after you described your symptoms, then you stated what you did and where you went. Those specific details typically are details, and our specific events are in the preterite. The climax of a story, in particular in this story, when I got my license or what happened right before or whatever, that's also in the preterite because those are details, those are specific events. And then in our conclusion, we focus, what tense do we see in the last sentence? It's all the preterite, right, exactly, which we use the preterite tense to summarize. Summarize an event. And if you recall, on your chapter 10 paragraph about the last time you got sick, you summarized your illness, right? If it was a, serious or not serious in general. A summary statement about when you got sick, okay? So now, keep all of that in mind as we go through sentence by sentence, idea by idea about what tense is used and why. Okay, so this is so great when you all were working in your groups or individually. Some people noticed right away that we're using the imperfect here with tenía but we have this age, right? What's this saying? Tenía 16 años. When I was 16 years old, which you're like, what? Profesita, you just told us we use the preterite when we use specific events. But today we're going to look at exceptions to the rule. When we can always know when we see the verb tener on the supersite with an age, we're going to use the imperfect. So we're going to note that rule. Even though, yes, it's a contradiction to the whole specific thing, we use, and write it down in the bottom because I have a little mnemonic device to remember this. Tenía 16 años. We use the imperfect when we are talking about how old we were. You know, we use tener when we talk about age in present tense, like tengo 39 años, tenía 16 años. Whenever we reference our age in the past, we always use tenía. It's just a rule, and it's an exception to the rule based on the uses of the preterite and imperfect. And we're going to see a couple more maybe like that. And then we have recibí, imperfecto or pretérito? Pretérito. ¿Por qué? Specific event, one action completed in the past, one time. Perfect. And then we have durante. That was my intro statement, okay? That's basically my thesis statement. But now, what am I talking about here?
Your whole childhood.
This long period of time. And notice what verb I'm using here. Quería. Quería es el imperfecto or pretérito. Imperfecto of what verb? What does this mean? I always what? Wanted. Remember last chapter, or chapter 9 actually, querer is a verb that changes meaning in the preterite. So if we use the verb querer in the preterite, it either means we tried or refused. It has nothing to do with wanting. So most of the time when we talk about wanting or needing, necesitar, necesitaba. Querer, quería. When we want to express wants and needs in the past tense, we're going to use the imperfect. Why? Because wanting and needing and things like that are ongoing actions. And in here, this is referring to an ongoing desire. 5. Okay, otro ejemplo, practicaba. So, imperfecto or pretérito. Imperfecto, ¿por qué? What's this saying? I what? Practice, right, exactly. Or used to practice. This indicates what? I practiced one time before my driver's test? What do we know about that? Multiple times, yes, of course. Anybody who wants to do well in the driver's test knows that you have to practice repeatedly. We can use the verb practicar in the preterite. We can say like, ayer practiqué al fútbol con el equipo de fútbol. But in this example, this is indicating repeated practicing. Maybe you used to practice the piano a lot as a child or growing up. But that's important to know. And then, antes de tomar el examen estaba lista y un poco nerviosa. So what's this saying? First of all, what's antes de mean? What does that even mean? Before. Careful, because sometimes people confuse antes with after because they both start with a. But remember, antes means before. Después means after. Antes comes before in the alphabet, the letter A. D comes after. So antes de plus infinitive. Before taking the test, yo estaba lista y un poco nerviosa. So está en el imperfecto o pretérito? Imperfecto. Muy bien. ¿Por qué? What am I talking about here? What am I doing?
You're ready for the exam.
Ready, but a little nervous. And I'm describing how I felt. I gotta remember the order of this acronym. Emotions. So how do you recognize these things when you're taking the test or you're doing the superside homework? You look for context clues. Boom, age, a number with años, it's tenía. Adjectives, and listen carefully, adjectives used with the verb estar to talk about how one feels. These are adjectives to describe emotions in perfect tense. So these are like little context clues, little things that if you recognize, you'll get the answer right. And this will be an easy concept to master at this level. Hacía sol, no llovía, era un día bonito. All these verbs are in what tense? Imperfecto, right. Imperfect. Because why? What am I talking about here? The weather, exactly. And this is important to note. Even though we would think, well, the weather changes, blah, blah, blah. These are descriptions. Again, we're describing. And when we describe, we typically use the imperfect. Not 100% of the time, but often. When we describe what the weather was like, and I can't emphasize enough the word describe, we use the imperfect. Hacía sol. Hacer is used with weather, and when we see hacía with a weather condition, we're typically describing the weather, and so we use the imperfect. Okay, here was another one that stood out to a couple of students who said, this seems like a little bit of a contradiction based on what you told us. Eran las 4 is talking about what? The time, which is very specific. Very, 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 very specific. But here's another exception to the rule because this verb, ser, is being used in what tense? What tense? Imperfect. This is the imperfect of ser. And this is an exception to the rule. And this was actually on chapter 10 homework. And you were like, it had ser, but it was plural, and I don't know why. That's because cuatro. It would just be era singular if it was 1 o'clock. But this is an exception to the rule. And we want to remember. And it's important to note time with the verb ser. It must be with the verb ser. Okay, because it's only when we're stating what time it was. Okay, so here's 2 context clues, chicos. If you have the verb tener plus a number and años, it's tenía. If you have the verb ser plus las and a number, it's eran, or era if it's 1 o'clock. Okay, so these are the context clues you really, really want to look for when you're doing your superside homework and on the chapter 11 tests. Okay? And then we have another verb here, pretérito or imperfecto. Pretérito. Now, why is this used in the preterite? When the test started. Right, exactly. Completed action in the past. I talked earlier about verbs like to start, to end. These are typically used in the preterite tense. And it's a specific action, therefore we use it. Primero, me subí al carro. So what's this saying? This is a new vocab word, so I kind of want to emphasize the meaning.
First you got in the car.
First I got in the car. Después prendí el carro con la llave. Started the car with the key. Muy bien. En el carro, el examinador me preguntó, ¿está lista? Y yo le dije, sí, y empecé a manejar el carro. I just went through all of those examples because all of those verbs are in the same tense. What tense are these verbs in?
Preterite.
The preterite tense. And I start with primero, después, luego, blah, blah, blah. And I'm listing what happened. I'm listing the specific events. They're all in the preterite because we use the preterite when we have a list or a sequence of events. So when you see those context clues, primero, luego, después, por último, anytime we're listing about, first I went to the cake party, then I did too many cake stands, later I barfed everywhere, and I went home, and then I passed out. If you were telling that story, which I'm sure somebody has told that story at some point in their life, you would use all the preterite tense to narrate that story in the past because you're listing off those events. And then if you said like the next day, or like, oh, I was so drunk, that would be a description mainly of how you were feeling, and so therefore you'd use the imperfect just to, apply it to college life. Okay, conduje por el centro de la ciudad, observando los semáforos y la velocidad. I really want to focus on the meaning here because there's some new terms, some new ideas unique to chapter 11. Primero, conduje. Conduje comes from what infinitive? Conducir. Is it in what tense? Preterite or imperfect? Preterite. It's in preterite tense, but notice it's totally irregular. What verb does it kind of remind you of in its irregular form? Decir. Muy bien. Excelente. Ganaste un peso. Decir. Decir, C-I-R. Conducir, perdón, C-I-R. Most verbs in the preterite tense, C-I-R, are going to follow the same pattern that we learned with the verb decir. So, note to self on your test, I'm probably going to give you this verb. And if it's in the preterite tense, you need to make sure you know its irregular form. Build on what we learned in chapter 9. So make sure you have that noted somewhere, that conducir has a total irregular form, just like the verb decir. Its irregular stem is C-O-N-D-E or C-O-N-D-U-J. And then we put on our endings, and this is a yo form ending. Why is this verb in the preterite? I what?
Drove.
I drove through, downtown, observando. What are semáforos? Stoplights, and velocidad is speed, which is kind of easy to remember because it's similar to what word in English? Velocity, right, which is a term in physics that talks about, motion. Velocidad. Preterite, specific event. This is the detail in the story. Okay, this is a really important example that we've actually already seen twice earlier in this story, but now we're looking at it a third time, and from this point forward, this is going to be so much easier on the super site and on the test. First, let's focus on meaning. Yo manejaba muy bien cuando otro carro me pasó rápidamente. Inmediatamente yo puse los frenos. So what happened? Manejaba comes from what verb? Manejar, which is a synonym to conducir. Manejaba is regular in what tense? It's actually regular in the other tense. But what tense is this? Manejaba. The imperfect, okay? So I really want to make sure I clarify exactly what manejaba means here. I was what?
Driving.
I was driving. And we're going to stop here real quick and talk about how this verb is being used, because we have already identified we use the imperfect for ongoing, repeated actions, background info, descriptions, and these rules. Anytime in Spanish we want to convey the idea of ing in the past tense, was doing something, we're going to use the imperfect. Last week, Denise was going to say something, or what was it? You were going to say something that James actually said. Do you remember this? And we talked about the verb ir, iba a decir, was going to say. And we talked about this last week, and I really emphasized, I was like, let's pause real quick and identify this use of the imperfect. Was going to do something, iba a plus infinitive, or just was doing something. You could say, yo dormía, I was sleeping. Or yo estudiaba, I was studying. Or yo miraba or veía una película, I was watching a movie. Anytime you want to convey the idea of what you were doing, when, this is muy importante, when something happens. Notice our subsequent verb after cuando is in what tense? Preterite. Chicos, when you're doing something and something interrupts that action, The order of your verbs are imperfect cuando preterite. I was sleeping when my roommate came home and woke me up. I was studying when the fire alarm went off. I was watching a movie when, I burnt my pizza or something like that. Whenever we have that construction of ideas, it follows a pattern. Imperfect cuando preterite. So, take a look in previous sentences in the story. Do you see any other uses of this structure where we have imperfect cuando preterite?
Eran las 4 de la tarde cuando empezó.
Muy bien. Eran las 4 de la tarde cuando el examen empezó. Aquí está. ¿Dónde? Okay. Imperfect cuando preterite. Any other areas where we have imperfect cuando preterite? There's one more example, previous, before this example, somewhere around here. At the beginning of the story, Denise? The very first sentence. Cuando imperfect preterite. Okay, so what we have here in these two examples with manejaba muy bien cuando otro carro me pasó, and the other one eran las 4 cuando el examen empezó. These are what I call cuando sandwiches. I just have coined that term. Anybody who's had profeseta knows about the cuando sandwich. Imperfect cuando preterite. On the test, I'm going to give you a cuando sandwich for sure, 100%. Your ampliación, you're going to use a cuando sandwich. You might even have a cuando sandwich in the oral question on part B of your next test. The cuando sandwich, just memorize, is imperfect cuando preterite. Okay? It's really actually easy because it's what was going on when something happened. But notice up top, this isn't really a cuando sandwich. It's what I call a cuando wrap. Because we've rearranged the order, but we're still saying the same thing. I can say, when the test started, it was 4 o'clock. Or when another car passed me quickly, I was driving really well. Or when my roommate came home, I was sleeping. Or when the alarm went off, I was studying. We can rearrange the order of our sentence, but still follow a consistent pattern. And when we change it to a cuando wrap, we just have to remember cuando imperfect and then preterite. Okay, but look out for the cuando sandwich on the super site. There's like an entire set of activities that are full of cuando sandwiches. And once you notice that pattern, then it becomes very easy not only to get the answers right, but also to understand the meaning, what was happening when something occurred. And then we have puse, la forma del pretérito irregular del verbo poner. El examinador no estaba contento. So otra vez we have estaba, imperfecto, después tuve que hacer. So tener irregular, pretérito or imperfecto, pretérito. Tuve que hacer la parte más difícil. So what's this saying? Después, context clue. I had to do something. Tuve que plus infinitive. And what's like la parte más difícil? The hardest part, which is what? Parallel parking. Estacionar. This is a new vocab word. Parallel parking. So we know this is a specific event. Some people reported to me, though, that they didn't have to parallel park during their driver's test. Did anybody not have to? Did you get your driver's test in Charleston?
North Carolina.
Okay, good, because nobody should get a driver's license in Charleston without learning to parallel park. And even if you didn't have to learn to parallel park in your driver's test, you certainly do in Charleston. Okay, antes. This is another important thing. So in the previous example, we had después, a sequencing word. But antes, here, comma, no tenía problemas estacionar en paralelo. So tenía here is used in what tense? Imperfect. Because what am I saying?
Before you never had problems.
Right, before I never had problems. So does this indicate one time or repeatedly? Repeatedly, right, exactly. So when I use that reference antes, I'm talking about this amount of time leading up to this moment, which definitely indicates like over and over and over and over and over again. So careful with antes. Antes is definitely going to cue the imperfect because it's referring to this whole amount of time where repeatedly I didn't have problems. Pero aquel día tuve un problema malo. So here we have tener with problema. One uses with the imperfect, the other one is with the preterite. Why did I switch to the preterite? I just used that verb in the imperfect.
Because that day you.
That day, exactly. So antes is just in general in the past repeatedly. No problema until that one day. So it's really important to identify the difference between repeated versus specific. All in one sentence, same verb, same concept or context, more or less. But these context clues are what really change which tense we use. Pregunta? Aquel. Muy bien. So we have like, esta agua and then like esa agua. So this water, that water. But when we're talking about like that other day or that water from, or that coffee that spilled or something, we use aquel because it's not really within our immediate like perception, if that helps. Aquel día. People will say ese día, but really aquel día is more appropriate. Okay, chicas, what's going on here? Inmediatamente. ¿Qué tenemos? Cuando sandwich. Muy bien, Denise. Ganaste un peso. So, estacionaba, imperfecto, cuando, choqué, pretérito. Why am I using a cuando sandwich here? What's going on? An interruption, exactly. I was what? What was I doing? Parallel parking. When what happened? I hit a parked car. Exactly. That did not actually happen. I actually, I just wanted to use chapter vocab, but I didn't put my hand on the back of the passenger seat when I parallel parked, and so I almost failed the driver's test. She was not in a good mood that day, I guess. You know how it is. Like, just depends on who you get and how happy they are. All right, but it's really important to note here, regardless of this being fictional, what was going on when something happened. And notice chocar, that's a new vocab word. And la forma de yo, and the preterite, it's a car verb. So we do have that change, C-A-R to Q-U-E. So remember when you're doing your superside homework, you click submit and you get it wrong. Don't forget your preterite forms and your preterite rules, which is why you should print out definitely for this chapter and utilize that document on Oaks that has all those different nuances with the preterite. Because imperfect's kind of easy in terms of the conjugations, but the preterite, if you have not mastered those conjugations yet, then you really need to polish up the supersite, the test, and the final exam. Okay. Inmediatamente, el examinador se bajó del carro y examinó el otro carro. So here we have two verbs in what tense? They're both in preterite. Exactly. Why? We just talked about inmediatamente in chapter 10. Immediately. What does it tell us? Yes, exactly. Something just happened. Immediately, boom. Something happened, which is why both these verbs are in the preterite. And what happened? He got out of the car. Right, exactly. And, examine the other car. Se bajó, reflexive, that's a new vocab verb on page 280. I wonder we used it. Okay, and then I used inmediatamente. Whoops. Un error, chicas. That should be an A. Inmediatamente me puse muy nerviosa. Okay, I really want to talk about this one. I just said inmediatamente cues what tense? Preterite, exactly, because that's something that just happened. But notice I've got nerviosa, which is what? An emotion. So careful, because I didn't say always when I talked about this. I said most of the time. In general, when we're describing how we felt, and we use the verb estar, we typically use the imperfect. Not always, but typically. But here, I'm not using the verb estar. I'm using the verb poner in its reflexive form. What do you think this means? I what? Immediately, I'm not saying I was nervous. I'm saying I got nervous. Right. When you use the verb ponerse, present tense, whatever tense you want. Ponerse, reflexive plus an adjective that talks about emotion, that changes the meaning to I got. Like I got sick, or I got dizzy, or I became so happy. Anytime we use that construction of ideas to talk about how we felt, we can use ponerse, and if it's in the past, we'll use the preterite. Él me dijo, está bien, era la cuneta. So it wasn't really a parked car, it was just the curb. What is él me dijo? What does that mean? Just to recycle what we learned in chapter 9 with those irregular. He told me, muy bien, excelente. Pretérito. I said. We use the imperfect of decir, like decía, if we want to say, oh, you know, my grandmother used to always say, if I want to convey that idea in Spanish, I'm going to use decía. She used to always say. Or even in class, I remember this so well when I was learning Spanish. A professor would be like, ¿qué decías? What were you saying? We're saying. What were you saying? ¿Qué decías? Or I was just saying, blah, blah, blah. And when we want to convey that idea in Spanish, we say, yo decía, blah, blah, blah. I was saying, the ing thing. But he told or she said, etc. would be dijo. Entonces, another context clue that introduces what? These two verbs are in what tense? Preterite. Se subió al carro. We talked about se bajó el carro. He got out of the car. But now he what? Se subió el carro. Got back in the car. Escribió. Y me dio el examen. Saqué, sacar. Pretérito, 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 pretérito. Why are all these verbs in the preterite? Because they're completed events. See, you know, just boom, 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 this happened, this happened, this happened. I really did get a 70 because of that whole parallel parking thing. But who cares? Recibí mi licencia. We don't care what our score is. We just want the keys to the car. All right. And then, this is the last thing, very important to note on the chapter test, on the final exam, and your ampliación. You also included this on your chapter 10 ampliación. So listen carefully, chicos. You don't want to get this wrong. Fue una experiencia de suspensa, pero buena. What am I saying here? What does fue mean? It was. Exactly. So remember in chapter 10, you were like, my sickness wasn't that bad, or my sickness was very serious. We're using what tense here? Preterite. Because why? Because it's what? Summarizing an event, a specific event, right? Summarizing a specific event using the verb ser in the preterite on the chapter test. The last answer is fue on this section. And you're either going to remember this and I'm going to be happy, or you're going to forget it and I'm going to be disappointed because I'm telling you an answer on the test. Why? Why is it going to be fue? Because I'm going to give you ser in parentheses and I'm going to ask you to put it in the preterite or imperfect, and you're going to want fue or fueron if the subject has to be plural, like mis vacaciones, fueron. So careful, it's either fue or fueron if it's singular or plural. Because I'm summarizing an event. This is my concluding statement. On your ampliación for chapter 11, just like chapter 10, you're going to include this. And some of you all didn't for chapter 10, so I definitely want to see it in chapter 11. It's also going to be on the final exam. So I'm giving you lots of information, lots of opportunities to get points so that you know it.